Hey guys, how's it going? It's Hi, and I'm here to bring you a video that, depending on your experience on this game, you may or may not have seen tutorials on this on YouTube. I know since the dawn of time, or since the dawn of COD, a lot of players have been struggling to improve their network speed and to have a better experience on this game overall. There have been ways uh, ranging from purchasing better internet, faster speeds, um, buying better hardware, modems, routers, what have you, uh, being hardwired versus going wireless, and also down to the nitty-gritty PS3 settings, using um, manual settings as opposed to automatic. That way you have a more refined control over your network settings and whatnot. Anyhow, I'm going to create a video just like that, but I'm going to create it based on my personal experience, how I went about fixing the problem, and how you'll be able to fix the problem, especially if you're not tech savvy. I'll go through it step by step, making sure I don't over indulge on tech terms, and try to make this tutorial as easy on you as possible. Okay, so background story. I was making some network adjustments recently, and normally I'm open NAT type. I don't have any problems with COD other than the other side, obviously, playing foreigners, those who have lacking internet speeds. So that you can't control, unfortunately, but at least you can kind of control your side of things and make it a little bit better for you. So anyway, I was making some network changes, and then one day when I was playing Black Ops 2 recently, as in yesterday, I found out the hard way that my NAT type was strict. And I didn't even notice that. I mean, I was playing and I was lagging, but again, I thought it was, the other players because I thought they were foreigners or maybe they had bad internet connections, whatever. I didn't blame myself because I thought, hey, I'm always NAT type open. I never have any issues. And then lo and behold, I go back and see the screen. I'm like, wait a second, I'm NAT type strict. What's the deal with that? So then I was struggling. I'm like, okay, what's going on? Am I wireless? And I first of all, I was wireless. So I was like, okay. So changed it back to being hardwired. Went back into the screen again and found that my NAT type was still strict. I'm like, what's going on? Is it something wrong with my internet connection? I mean, is there doing some maintenance with, the lines? Or I was starting to get frustrated because everything on my network was great. Then I went into my settings on my PS3 and found out that my IP address was wrong. The IP address I used was not the one that I should have been using, and I'll explain later why that made a difference. So I changed the IP address to what it should have been, left everything the same, got back onto the screen, and it showed NAT type open. So I was relieved. My network was pretty much working as it should. It was just my fault for changing the IP address for that one particular reason that I can't remember why I did. Anyway, so that just dawned upon me. I'm like, you know what? Let me make a video. Let me go through the steps on how to fix it. You know, settings on the PS3, then going to the router if you have access to it, making changes there, and then going back to the PS3 and then testing it out. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to get out of here because, hey, there's no more reason to be on the screen other than just to prove that my NAT type is strict. And then quit the game because, the only way to change network settings is to quit the game. At least in the PS3. The PS4, you can actually do it without having to quit out of the application, as far as I know. Okay, so we're going to go to the network settings. Okay, and you're going to check your internet connection settings. Okay, that's going to sign me off, no problem. So my first tip, always customize your internet connection settings. I mean, I understand that people may or may not be tech savvy, but I really believe that customizing it is almost as easy as selecting easy. and you'll have a better understanding as to what you'll be putting in for the settings. So go to custom. Again, between wired and wireless, unless you have no way of making it wireless, I mean wired, use wireless obviously, but I recommend wired. And in fact, for those that don't have wired connections, like you can't be dragging a wire to your room, maybe the router may be downstairs and you're upstairs, and having a 100-foot cable isn't feasible. There is Powerline adapters that you can purchase where basically you plug the device into an outlet. You can connect that device with an Ethernet cable and then plug it into your PS3 or PS4, and it'll be as if it were a wired connection. Because basically, the Powerline adapters use your home's, basically, the power lines in order to connect to the router, and then that basically secures a wired connection. Of course, there's another a device, a similar adapter that goes where the router is. You plug it into the outlet, and then an Ethernet cable connects from that adapter to the router. So that's how it basically, connects that circuit. You goes from the PS3 into the Powerline adapter in your room, and then goes in, through your home to the other Powerline adapter that's near the router, and then that's how you get your quote-unquote wired connection. So I'm going to select wired. Now this, do not choose auto detect, choose manual settings. Again, we want to customize our internet connection settings so that we get the best experience possible. Now this, you can choose auto detect. Most devices these days have either 100 base T or 1000 base T full duplex. If you know exactly what you have, you can select it. However, I just choose auto detect because it's just easier on me, and it's one of those things that is not going to make or break your experience unless you have internet connections faster than 100 megabits, which I highly doubt that you do. At least 90% of the US does not have that. So we're going to choose auto detect. IP address setting, again, we want to customize our experience, so we can choose manual. Now here is where you're going to be doing most of your work. Your IP address, subnet mask, default router, primary DNS, and secondary DNS. Your IP address should match whatever scheme that you have on your router. And again, I know you may not be tech savvy, but when you're first setting up your router, you have to log in to the administration pages and make some changes here and there, whether it be the password to the router itself, some Wi-Fi changes or settings, and if you're more advanced, then you can do some more advanced stuff in there. But one of the most basic things that you need to do is to understand what type of IP address range your router is going to give you, as if you were using an automatic setting. Some routers use a 192.168.1.0. Some others may use 192.168.0.0. And again, it depends on the router you have. You might want to look into that and see which exactly which scheme it uses. So my network range goes from 192.168.1.0 to 192.168.1.100. So again, you need to check it out and then find out, and then make your IP address static. So I made my IP address to be 192.168.1.11, okay? Subnet mask, that's always, I'd say 99% of the time, is going to stay as the 255.255.255.0. Okay, unless you have this huge network at home, or if you're so advanced that you want to adjust it, then leave it alone. Okay. Third is the default router. Now this is the IP address of your router in your home. Okay. So the internal IP, which is again, usually it's the first IP address that is in that range. So in my case, again, 192.168.1.1. If you have a range that goes 192.168.0.0, then it'll be 192.168.0.1. There might be some advanced users out there that like to change this. Fine, change it, but make sure it's the same. In fact, I may not even have to explain to you if you actually know what you're doing, but this is for beginners only. Okay? Primary DNS. Now this is what your PlayStation 3 or 4 will require in order to access web pages, servers based on their name. Okay? Without this, you won't be able to sign on to PSN, you won't be able to check the internet, web pages, videos, anything from your PlayStation 3 or 4. You need this. Now normally, the primary DNS is set to be exactly the same as the default router, which makes sense because your default router, which is your hardware router, gets those DNS requests from the modem. And the modem, which either belongs with your service provider or if you bought it, purchased it your own, either way, it gets those DNS, requests out from the internet and then back to you. However, I like to use an external DNS setting basically because my service provider may not have the best DNS entries or may not be the fastest. I'm using Google's DNS because this is the best DNS that I've experienced based on my location. I did some tests on my computer and found that web pages resolve a lot faster if I'm using Google DNS. So, as a result, this is what I'm using. Primary, 8.8.8.8, okay? Secondary, which is also Google DNS, it's just their secondary server, is just 8.8.4.4. Again, this is what I'm using, and in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my IP address from 111 to 112, and again, you'll see why. MTU, maximum transmission unit, just leave this automatic. You don't really need to change it unless for some reason you're having severe transmission issues with your data, and that's usually the case if you're having, again, if your internet is very, very fine-tuned and requires you to make this change. For the most part, don't bother with it. Just leave it automatic. The PlayStation knows how to take care of itself. Proxy server, again, most people won't use this. Just say do not use. UPnP, now this is debatable. I don't use any devices that require this, and plus I think that enabling it would cause your network performance to decrease just by a little bit. But again, those that have devices connected to the PS3 can enable it for better experience. But for me, I want to squeeze out as much network performance as possible, so I'm going to say disable. Okay, and so now we're at the summary screen. I'm just going to take a look over it. Everything looks cool. I'm just going to hit X to save it, and now we test it out. Okay. Alright, not too bad. Now, my internet connection is 30 megabits down and 3 megabits up. The PS3 is old technology, and a lot of times the download speeds and the upload speeds don't exactly match what you have. I know the PC does a lot better job of doing speed tests and not through web pages, but this is through the PS3 network, or the PSN network rather, and their judgment on bandwidth, they could be testing the bandwidth on their servers, which may be close or far away depending on where you're at. So the accuracy of the download and upload speeds aren't exactly, it should be taken with a grain of salt. Okay, for your true test of speed, you should definitely just use your PC or Mac and then test out the speeds that way. That is your true test. But with the PSN, they're going to use their own bandwidth tests, and most likely it's not going to be up to snuff compared to your actual speeds. Okay, so now let's go ahead and start up Black Ops 2. Now again, the only thing I changed was just the IP address. Okay, and then once I demonstrate what I'm going to demonstrate, you'll be like, wow, okay, I just changed my IP address. Nope, there's more. Okay, so just hang on there, and then we'll wait for this to load up, and then with any luck, I'll be NAT type open. And voila, NAT type open. Can you believe that? And I can't believe there's 60,708 people playing Black Ops 2. Far more than AW, far more than Ghosts. This game is still kicking alive. Anyway, I digress. So, changing an IP address made it go from strict to open? No way. And you're absolutely right. That there is no way. That would not have affected anything. But what I'm about to show you next, after I set everything up here, is I'm going to go into the router, and I'm going to go into a special setting where you basically assign an IP address to basically your IP address on your PS3 or PS4, and then save the settings on the router, and then go back, do your PS3 or PS4, and do the test. Okay, so stay tuned. Okay guys, I'm back, and I have my router logged in, and I wanted to show you this before we get started with the changes. So this is where you would go in to your router, again depending on what you have, just check out what type of range you have, and to properly set your PlayStation 3 or 4 with the correct IP address. Usually it's under LAN setup, and in here it shows that okay, the IP address of my router is 192.168.1.1. That's going to be your default router on your PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 4. Subnet Mask, again, you want it to match the same on here as you and transport that basically onto your PS3 or PS4. In this case, it's the 255.255.255.0 subnet mask. Now, the starting IP and ending IP, this is where the router will give away these IP addresses to your devices in your home. So it's going to start with an address and it's going to end somewhere. And with these default settings on this router, it's going to start at 2 and it's going to end at 50. My recommendation, do not choose an IP address that your router can give away. Why? Because, for example, if you choose like 192.168.1.10, okay, you're like, okay, fine, I got an IP address. It's within the range. However, if you turn off your PlayStation 3 or 4, what happens? Does it keep the IP address? No, it doesn't. The way networking works is after a certain amount of time, that IP address gets released from, the device, so to speak, and gives it back to the router. Like the router will find out that, hey, no one is using this IP address anymore. It's been about, 24 hours, give or take, depending on the lease time. That's why they call it a DHCP lease. And it'll assign that IP address to someone else or some other device that needs it more. So you turn off your PS3 or PS4. And then you start turning on your computer, your smartphone. If you have a family or you live with your family, they may have computers, they may have smartphones. Nowadays, lots of technologies out there have, are internet capable, so they'll have IP addresses. What's going to happen? It's going to give away all these IP addresses within that range, okay? And then when you turn on your PS3 or 4, you're going to have an issue because you assigned an IP address that was in that range, and some other device may have already taken it. Then what? So your PS3, PS4 is going to run into a conflict, an IP address conflict, basically stating that, okay, hey, there are two devices with the same IP addresses. That can happen. You're going to need to do something about it. Okay, well, the device that already has that IP address, you can go and turn it off, turn it back on, or you can reboot it if it's a computer, and it can try to, acquire a new IP address, fine. But, what if someone is using that device? You can ask them to reboot the computer if they're working, or if it's something like a phone, you can ask them to turn it off and on. I mean, yeah, if you're nice about it, sure, but again, this is your problem. You need to fix it. So, my recommendation is do not choose an IP address within that range. So my range is from 2 to 50, and you saw me change my IP address, right? You saw me change it to 192.168.1.112. That isn't in that range anymore, but it's still within the entire range that the router can support, because the subnet mask of 255.255.255.0 basically means the router can support up to 254 hosts. Okay, so if you were a router, okay, and you had 254 other items out there that you can give IP addresses to, you can. Now, the IP address uses one itself, so technically it's 253, but that's still a lot of devices, and most likely if you're in a home, you're not going to be using those up. That's why the IP addresses that the router gives out is very small, unless you have this gigantic array of technologies out there. But anyway, you want to choose something above 50 or above whatever the range is, so that way it'll always keep that IP address. So next time when you turn off your PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4, you're always going to keep that IP address. No one is going to ever use it. Unless they specifically assign it to that device, no one is going to use that IP address. Simple enough? Okay, great. Now I'm going to go to the WAN setup, and then the WAN setup is where you would make this magical change, and I'm going to call it magic. Great. I'm going to have to enter because I timed out. Alright, there we go. So this is where you would make your special change here, and do you recognize something similar? My IP address is in there, but it's in the field of the default DMZ server. Now, to make a long story short, a DMZ, also known as a demilitarized zone, basically puts that particular device within a zone, so to speak, which allows open connection to anything and everything on the internet. Okay, there's no protection against it per se, unless it has its own internal protection, but it's not going to be subjected to any type of inspection of traffic. Okay, so the routers, they normally have a built-in firewall that protects you against certain types of traffic, and it also hinders any traffic, and by inspecting it first and saying, okay, hey, if this is good traffic, we'll let it go. If it's not, then we will drop it. Okay, by situating your PS3 or PS4 as a DMZ server, or DMZ for short, it basically will allow it access to the entire outside internet, without much protection. And that means you're more open, okay, the keyword is open, to connect to the network. This is a good and bad thing. It's good because it'll enhance your network performance, okay, because you're not subjected to any of those restrictions that the other devices may be subjected to. On the flip side, it's bad because now, again, you're leaving your PS3, PS4 open to a possible attack. There are no there's less security behind putting your PS3 or PS4 within the DMZ. But again, if you keep this in mind, what are the chances of your PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 4 being hacked? I'm sure it's possible, but it's just a PS3, PS4. There really isn't anything on there that is worth hacking. I mean, your PlayStation account is not linked. I mean, it's confidential, so unless they hack the Sony servers in general, they're not going to get information out of you. Okay? So I can say that for 99% sure that no one is going to be playing around on your PS3 or PS4. They would need to know your external IP address. They would need to know how to break into your router security, and then they would need to basically get into your PS3 somehow and wreak havoc. So there's a lot of layers of security, even if you put your PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 within the DMZ. So, like I said, you can have a peace of mind knowing that putting your PlayStation 3 or 4 in the DMZ will keep it safe and will provide you with better network performance when you're playing your video games. So it doesn't have to be particular with COD, but it could be other games such as Battlefield or Destiny or Titanfall. I mean, again, the exclusivity of the consoles is not just PlayStation. It could be Xbox and the Nintendo Wii, whatever. Okay. So enter your default DMZ server as the IP address that you assign your PlayStation 3 or 4, and then leave all the other stuff default. I disable IGMP proxying because that's the default setting. You see the MTU size in bytes, right? And remember I asked on the PlayStation 3 what to use. I use automatic. It's going to pull it straight from the router, and then see, okay, I'm using 1500 bytes. Fine. And then even if you see NAT filtering, I mean, I know the NAT is a term that Call of Duty uses, but on the router, I like to keep it secured. I don't want to open it up because that kind of provides an extra. I'm just peeling it off an extra layer of security for possible intruders, so I want to keep that secured. And once you're done, you just hit apply. It'll take some time for the router to accept the changes, depending on how quick it is. And once you're done, go back to your PlayStation 3 and test it out and see if it works. And if you're really paranoid about it, you can always change your PlayStation 3 IP address to another IP address. Again, make sure it's not within the range that the router can give away. And you can set it back to something else that's not the same as the DMZ server on the router. And then that way you'll be protected. Okay? Again, if you're paranoid like that. I'm okay. I've had the PS3 since it came out and assigned my PS3 to the DMZ server and never had an issue with it. Okay? So again, peace of mind, change it, apply the settings, test it out. And if you're really paranoid, just change the IP address to something else, like 111, like I had before. Okay? So that's pretty much it. I'm going to go ahead and try some other games out. I have Modern Warfare 3 for the PlayStation 3, so I'm going to test out to see if that works with that as well. If I'm going to be NAT strict type, or I'm going to be open still, even with the PS3 not being the DMZ server. We'll see. Alright guys, I'm back, and I popped in Modern Warfare 3 for PlayStation 3, and as you can see, I am NAT type strict. I changed my IP address back from 112 to 111, so it's no longer the DMZ server according to my router, and fired up the game, and look, I'm back to the NAT type strict. So let's see if my changes actually work. So I'm gonna quit the game. Alright, quit. to network settings. Custom, wired, manual, auto detect, manual, and I'm going to change my IP address back from 111 to 112. And remember, 112 was set as the default DMZ server according to my router. Okay, leaving everything else the same. Automatic, do not use, disable, UPnP, save, test. Okay, fair enough. So now I'm going to back and start the game. Alright, play online. Wow, and look at that. I'm NAT type open. So, again, this is test number 2 on a different game. Change it from a non-DMZ server to a DMZ server and went from strict to open. Right? So now I'm going to go ahead and then fire up the PS4 and do the same thing. I'm going to give it a different IP address. Going to change the settings to see if it does the same for a Ghost and Advanced Warfare, thus proving my point further that putting the PlayStation on the in the DMZ will enhance your network performance. Okay. Alright guys, I'm back. It took me a minute to fire up the PlayStation 4, grab Ghosts, dust it off, and fire it up. Before I did, I changed my IP address from being the DMZ server to not being the DMZ server anymore, and look what happened. I am a NAT type strict. That means I am not going to have a good experience playing this game. I probably don't even have a good experience playing this game even if it was open, but that's beside the point. Anyway, let me go back to the network settings here. I'm just going to close it, you know, just to make sure I clear everything out. I know I could technically leave it open probably, but you know, I'd rather just close out the application. Anyway, go back to settings, network. I'm going to set up the internet connection. Again, we're going to hardwire, use the LAN cable, customize because, you know, we like to struggle a bit here. Manual, and I'm going to change the IP address from 111 to 112, which again, as we know, is my DMZ server according to my router. Leaving everything else pretty much the same as we did on the PlayStation 3. The only reason why mine looks a little bit different is because I wanted to test some things out and haven't reverted back to my previous settings. So, but you should leave it the same as what I had it on the PlayStation 3, and then you'll be golden. Next, Mtu Settings automatic, Proxy Server don't use, test it. Okay, and there we go. So now I'm going to go back to the game, start it up, and then let's see what happens if it stays strict, moderate, open. I'm actually curious. Well, there you have it, guys. It's showing up as being NAT type open. Coincidence? I think not. Okay, now I got one more test for you. I'm going to pop in the latest and greatest game, Advanced Warfare. Well, the latest game, not necessarily the greatest. Alright guys, I'm back for one more final test. Here is Advanced Warfare, okay? And I changed my IP address again from being the DMZ server to not being the DMZ server. And I am NAT type strict. By the way, take a look at my character here. Ooh, very nice, very nice. Work it, work it, work it. Okay, I'm done. So I'm gonna go back and change the settings. Close out the app first. And network. Set up. I mean, you guys are probably used to this by now, you know, going through it a couple times here if you have both consoles. Changing the IP address, okay, from 111 to 112, leaving everything else the same. Automatic, don't use, test. Okay, fine. Go back. And there you guys have it, NAT type open. So, not sure what more I can do. It basically, you know, is a tried and true method to put your PlayStation as the DMZ server. You can also do port forwarding, however, you know, there are some complexities with that. You have to go and find what the ports are, the open. I mean, it's basically the same thing as a DMZ, but you're being more specific and you're not allowing everything. But because we're only using a PlayStation console, it's not our computer, it doesn't have any confidential information on it per se. Like I said, I think we're relatively safe just keeping our PlayStation devices as DMZ or whatever console you may be using. And you know, when you're done, you turn it off. It's that simple, right? Whereas in a computer or server, if you keep it on, chances are, you know, it could be more exposed over time, and then you don't want that. You want to be safe and secure, and we limit our um, holes, security holes, as little as possible. All right, guys. Well, that's gonna be a wrap for me. Again, I apologize for any long-winded discussions about this or my explanations. Uh, it's just the way how I explain things, and I can be brief with you, but you know, just having a more casual environment with this video, um, it allows me to kind of go a little bit more in depth and, you know, talk with you as if I were instructing you, so to speak. Thanks, guys, for watching, and if you have any extra comments or questions about this matter, feel free to leave me a comment, and I'll address to you as soon as I can.